think about your day so far. You've probably relied on dozens of promises without even thinking about it. You trust your bank deposit is safe. You expect an online payment to just work. You assume a contract will be honored. Most of the time, all these promises just hold up, quietly, in the background. They're like the hidden architecture of our entire modern lives. But what's actually holding it all together? So let's just boil it all down to one fundamental question. How in the world do you trust a complete stranger with your money? It sounds so simple, right? But it's actually one of the biggest puzzles of our economy. And the answer? Well, it reveals this hidden machinery of rules, systems, and trust that we almost never see. That is, until it breaks.
Okay, so to really get a grip on these massive, complex systems, we've got to zoom way in. We need to start small and look at the simple and surprisingly fragile nature of a personal promise. You know, just between two people.
Now, this completely flips the script on what a promise actually is. We usually think of it as, a statement of intent, a sign of sincerity. But in the world of finance, in the world of economics, a promise is really an arrangement. It's a structure. The real question isn't, do you mean it right now? The real question is this thing going to hold up when everything gets complicated later? And yeah, this right here is the heart of the problem. Most people want to keep their promises. Broken promises rarely start with someone being dishonest. They start with constraints. Life happens, right? Things change. So if you're just relying on good faith, any promise you make is incredibly fragile, because wanting to keep it is just not the same thing as being able to. And here's where things get, well, a little sneaky. As situations change, so do the incentives. People naturally respond to what's being rewarded or what's being tolerated in the moment. The original words of the promise might stay exactly the same, but if the incentives shift, the behavior is going to shift with them. It's like the deal is being quietly rewritten without anyone ever making an announcement. You know how sometimes we leave things a little vague to make an agreement go smoothly? It lets us kind of sidestep those awkward what-if conversations. But that flexibility, it becomes a huge, fatal flaw the second pressure hits. When time is short and the stakes are high, all that ambiguity just becomes an invitation for conflict, and the promise falls apart right when you need it the most. Okay, so we've established that personal promises, they're fragile. Super fragile. They don't handle pressure well, and they definitely don't work between strangers. So how do we build a whole modern economy that runs on billions of promises between people who will never, ever meet? This slide right here shows the massive pivot we had to make. We moved from a world based on knowing someone, on their reputation, to a world built on impersonal systems. Trust is no longer in the person, it's in the process. And that is what allows promises to scale up from just two people to literally millions. So what's the fix? Well, it's institutions. Things like banks, legal systems, payment networks. They aren't just buildings or companies. You should think of them as the machinery. They are carefully designed machines that make promises reliable between total strangers across huge distances and over very long periods of time. But here's the thing about this machinery. It doesn't run on gears and oil. It runs on something totally invisible, something we all rely on and we all contribute to: trust. The reason institutional trust works, the reason you can even do this stuff, is because it's predictable. You don't need to know the bank teller personally. You don't need to know the person on the other end of a stock trade. You just trust that the system is going to follow a set of established, consistent rules. That predictability, built up layer by layer over time, is what lets us all make commitments without needing to know everyone involved. So what's the secret sauce? How do they actually pull this off? Well, they make a few key swaps. Instead of having to be familiar with someone's reputation, you rely on a clear procedure. Instead of depending on someone's good judgment during a crisis, you depend on predefined rules. And instead of relying on what someone remembers, you have verifiable written records. That's the formula for creating trust that can actually scale. Okay, but this whole amazing system has a weak spot, a vulnerability. And what's so important to get is that trust doesn't just, poof, vanish overnight. It doesn't break. It erodes. It decays slowly and quietly, often long before anyone even notices the cracks starting to show up on the surface. And this next idea is maybe the most critical insight of all. Those big, sudden failures you hear about, they are almost always just the final symptom of a long, slow decay. The system drifts away from its own principles, from its own procedures so gradually that nobody sounds the alarm. This quiet drift is the real danger to the very institutions that hold our world together.
And this erosion, this decay, it almost always follows a pretty predictable playbook. First, small failures start happening, and everyone just kind of accepts them as normal. Then, making exceptions to the rules becomes routine. After that, the official explanations for why things are different, they start to sound less and less believable. All the while, behind the scenes, people are quietly losing faith. The final spectacular break, it only happens after the foundation of trust has already crumbled away.
Now, here's a really fascinating, kind of weird example of this in action. We all think of consistency as a good thing, as a sign of trustworthiness, right? But in finance, perfectly smooth, predictable returns are often a massive red flag. Real life is messy. It goes up and down. That kind of unnatural smoothness can be a sign that trust is being manufactured, not actually earned. It's a classic symptom of that quiet drift we were just talking about. So where does all this leave us? We're living in this world, this invisible architecture of promises. How are we supposed to navigate it? Now, the point of all this isn't to make you a total cynic who trusts nothing and nobody. I mean, that's just impossible. It's impractical. The real goal is to develop better judgment, to understand what makes a promise strong and what the early warning signs of that quiet erosion look like. At the end of the day, this is really what it boils down to. We have to participate. We have to trust the systems all around us to live our lives. But we can do it with our eyes wide open. We can practice trust without blindness, being aware of the structures that make promises credible, but also being keenly aware of the subtle signs that they might be starting to fray. And that brings us right back to where we started. But now, the question is a lot sharper. It's not just about trusting a stranger anymore. It's about understanding the whole system that stands between you and them. In a world built entirely on promises, learning to tell the difference between a promise that's credible and one that's hollow, well, that might be one of the most important skills you can have.